And tonight's tale. I landed a dream job at a lighthouse. It had strange rules. The Covenant, Part 1. Silence, seclusion, solitude, a respite from the hustle and bustle of the technology-fueled world of constant distraction, entertainment, and consumerism. Surely, something to be desired after the chaos of big city life. Yet, there is a reason we countless prisoners have gone mad after spending years in solitary confinement, along with nothing but their thoughts and the whispers of their own inner demons to keep them company, warping their sense of reality until there is nothing left but the howling of the abyss or an empty husk of a human being. And yet, it was the solitude and isolation from the world and noise of society at large that my dear wife had longed for and spoke of often, in the quietly excited voice of hers that made her eyes glint with excitement. Imagine it, Eli, getting away from it all. No constant sound of car tires rolling past the house, no neighbours for miles around. The kids being able to run around to their heart's content without some noisy neighbour complaining about all the sound. Ashley, my wife, had her heart set on moving up north, way up north to Alaska, and building a little cabin smack in the middle of some large parcel of land, well out of the way of the nearest town, and bucking the conventions of society as much as possible. She had had it all planned out, down to the floor plan of the cabin she wanted to build and the colour she wanted to paint the walls of her bedroom. She could imagine what the kitchen would smell like, she would sigh now and then, when she was imagining herself baking fresh bread in the morning, and would tell me all about how she would love to see the light streaming in through the windows to fill the place with warmth and light. A happy little home away from the world. And I wanted, more than anything, to give that to her. Say what you want about traditional gender roles and toxic masculinity, but I was the man of the house, and it was my greatest desire to protect and provide for my family. And I wanted to provide my wife with the life that she had always dreamed about. I've always been old-fashioned that way, I suppose. Ashley and I had 2 beautiful children, each of which had been blessed with her dirty blonde hair and light brown eyes. Max was just about to turn 13 and had finally decided to crop that dirty blonde hair shirt into a fluff of curls that I had not seen since they were a baby. Briar, on the other hand, was just shy of 10, with locks that were perpetually swept back into a ponytail that hung down between the shoulder blades. They were both genuinely intelligent kids, with no really outspoken behavioural problems, and a general lust for life, just like Ashley. My job, though, stable enough to maintain us, was hardly enough income to build my darling wife the house she desired, on the way out of society, or start up her little homestead, though I did wish to make her happy with all my heart. And though it wasn't the sort of homestead that she longed for, when I saw an ad online looking to hire a lighthouse keeper off the coast up north, I put in my resume and hoped for the best. The interview went surprisingly well, and I had an offer in hand by the time Ashley was told about the whole thing. I would be making good money tending the lighthouse, which also served as a living space, with plenty of space for the whole family. She was sceptical at first, but once I showed her pictures of the property, she was more excited and delighted than I could have ever imagined. The move would take us roughly 1,200 miles across the country, But what wouldn't time bonus to help with moving costs made it more than feasible to pack up the rented townhouse that we lived in into a U-Haul and trek on over to the lighthouse. The work itself seemed very minimal from the description, and we'd be able to set off quite a ways from the bulk of society. The best part, however, came not only in the sizable paying price, but in the free living quarters. Without the need to pay rent, we'd be able to save for a down payment for her dream house in just over 2 years' time. It was decided the very night I told her about the offer. I put in my 2 weeks at the factory, and we began the process of packing up the house we lived in for the last 5 years. The kids were, surprisingly, psyched about the idea of moving into a lighthouse, and Briar in particular would not stop asking questions about what it would be like. Would I let them turn on the light? Would a slinky be able to walk down all the stairs in the lighthouse without stopping? Would there be secret passages, like in that movie we had all watched a few months ago for family movie night? We finally headed out that first Saturday morning after I left my old job, and began the 4-day journey to a new life. Mrs. Geraldine, my new employer, had been in contact the night before to ensure that the keys had arrived via courier. They did, and informed us that, per Ashley's request, the internet had been connected for the children to be able to continue their schooling throughout a remote homeschool program she had found. She also let me know that she had left some paperwork for me to sign on the table just inside the front door for when we arrived, and then she wished us a safe journey. The trip, as it turned out, was surprisingly uneventful. A little over 3 days on the road, with minimal stops for bathroom breaks, leg stretching, fuel and sleep, brought us up the gravelled road where the lighthouse came into view at about 10 o'clock Tuesday morning, a full day sooner than we were planning to arrive. The light, of course, was not shining in the bright light of the clear morning, but the tower stood, tall and proud, near the end of a cliff face. The tower itself had been painted with ringing stripes of red and blue, rather like garlands on a Christmas tree, that wrapped themselves around the white column that was the bulk of the tower. It was capped at the top by black metal interspaced with large windows around the whole of the tower, facing out in every direction. It was a little worn from the weather and the salt of the sea, no doubt, and would need a new coat of paint this coming summer, Mrs. Geraldine had already informed me, but it otherwise appeared to be in good shape. The grounds were amazing to behold, and Ashley and the kids were as excited as could be. A waist-height stone wall ran around a massive plot of land, looking to start just a foot or so from the cliff, and stretched out to either side of the lighthouse in a large distance before turning to wrap around to the front gate. The lighthouse stood, as Mrs. Geraldine had stated, on a 5-acre plot of land that was now mine to live on and maintain, in addition to operating the lighthouse as instructed. My family was over the moon with having all of that space, and the kids already started asking if we could get a dog, since there would be space for one to run around, as opposed to our previous little suburban neighbourhood, exchanging excited comments over the walkie-talkies that we had used to communicate between our vehicles during the long trip. Admittedly, I was exhausted from the long trip, and not looking forward to lugging out everything in the U-Haul into that tower, but I agreed that we would look into getting a pet soon. Probably. When we arrived, Max and I hopped out of the U-Haul and Ashley and Briar jumped out of the family truck. Briar took off running towards the door of the lighthouse, eager to get inside. With a little chuckle, I put my arms around my wife, kissed her cheek, and handed her the keys I had made for her. The key chain was a custom order that we had had delivered to the neighbours just before we left, so that she wouldn't find it in the mail. Just a nice little surprise. It was in the shape of a little wooden cabin with a green roof. Set into the front was a single word in a cursive script in a bright, cartoonish pink that said simply, "Soon." Her eyes lit up, and she gave me that special smile of hers, the one where she would close her eyes and look down at the ground, pressing her lips together as her cheeks raised, fighting to contain the smile. When she looked up at me again, there was evidence of the smallest of little tears in her eyes, as she took them from my hand. "Keys to the castle, my lady," I said quietly. She threw her arms around my neck, jumping up a little to do so, as I was several inches taller than her, and pecked my cheek before bouncing off towards the door in a state of childlike happiness herself. Moments like that sustained me throughout this life, and this was one I knew I would never forget. I stood back to watch her for a moment, savouring it, committing it to memory as she approached the door and slid the key happily into the lock. I made my way down the little slabstone path towards the door as she opened it for the first time and stepped back to look at me, biting her bottom lip between her teeth with a smile full of anticipation and excitement as she pushed it open fully and stepped inside. I sped up to cross the distance more quickly and entered just a moment behind Max, who was a little bit more trepidatious than the rest of us. The doorway opened into a little hallway, its roof curved slightly into a dome. Positioned against the wall on the right was a small wooden table, its legs carved to look like flowers growing up from the ground. On its surface sat a white lace doily, the sort my grandmother had had on just about every surface in her home when I was younger, and seated atop the doily was a large crystal ball that sparkled brilliantly in the light coming from the open door. Resting within the bowl was a creamy yellow envelope that read "Welcome" on the front. Ashley had already moved beyond the hallway and was exploring the house with the kids, no doubt off to claim bedrooms for themselves. I closed the door behind me and found that there was quite a bit of natural light spilling out into the hallway from the room beyond, though there was a small chandelier-style light fixture hanging from the domed ceiling of the hallway. I reached for the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside the envelope were 2 sheets of creamy yellow stationery that matched the envelope. The first sheet seemed to be some kind of contract form. I set it aside and looked at the second sheet, which contained a letter written in black ink and a measured, careful hand. To Mr. Eli J. Williams. Congratulations on your new position. I wanted to be the first to welcome you and your family to the Stalward. This old girl has weathered her fair share of storms and seen many a lost ship throughout the darkness. I trust that she is in good and capable hands. We have just discovered many details of your employment, and we've discussed them
at length through email previously. You will find a binder upstairs in the lightbox that will remind you of operating procedures for the lighthouse, if you ever need them. The following list of rules should help make your stay more comfortable, as well as to ensure the safety of you and your family during your tenure at the Stalward. When you have finished discussing the rules with your family, please have each member of your family sign the enclosed form and deposit it in the blue outgoing mailbox at the end of the drive for collection. Good luck, and God bless. Mrs. A. Geraldine, Board of Trustees Caretaker, the Stalward Group.
Mrs. Geraldine was so sweet to think of her family like this, I thought, as I turned the letter over, expecting to find a list of basic rules that you might find in any landlord-tenant agreement. Ashley and I had been renting for years now, and we were well accustomed to such rules. There were usually mandates about how often the garden had to be weeded, or the grass cut, information about trash collecting, reminders that there were no smoking on the property, etc. I read over the rules quickly once, then stared at the sheet for a moment, perplexed by the strangeness, before I read them for a second time, more carefully. Rule 1. The lamp in the lightbox must remain lit from 1 hour before sundown until 1 hour after sunrise. You may wish to consult the almanac in the lightbox binder for appropriate times each day. However, if any Thursday should fall on the 3rd of the month or the 17th of the month, be certain that all the light in the Stalward and Crowns, not just the lightbox, remain off after 10 p.m. until 1 hour after sunrise the following morning. Additionally, if any Tuesday should happen to fall on either the 22nd or the 25th of the month, all lights in the Stalward and the Crowns, not just the lightbox, must remain on until midnight, even in the daytime. Rule 2. Once the enclosed covenant has been signed, there must always be one member of the signed family present either in the Stalward or on the Crowns at all times during the duration of the contract. In this case, 2 years. It doesn't matter if it's you, your wife, or a child. One person must be present either in the lighthouse or within the stone wall that marks the grounds. Rule 3. Groceries and other supplies may be ordered from the list of approved vendors provided to you by email. These vendors will leave supplies at the front gate for you to retrieve them. If you wish to order supplies from vendors not on the approved list of vendors, ensure that no vendor comes inside the gates to deliver packages, including the mail. Rule 4. Never remove mail from the blue outgoing box at the end of the driveway. Only place outgoing mail in the blue box. If mail is delivered to the blue outgoing box by mistake, do not touch it. Wait until the postal service corrects the mistake. Rule 5. It is strongly recommended that you do not allow guests to enter the Stalward. However, if you are going to have to allow guests inside, guests are not to remain within the Stalward once the lightbox has been lit. overnight guests are strictly forbidden. I looked over the first sheet again after I read the rules. It looked to be a handwritten form, with spaces provided for myself, my wife, and both our children to sign our names, print our names, affix a date, and a line for each entry that read, "Relationship to caretaker." I carried both of them with me as I made my way through the small hallway and out into the front room. Sure, the rules seemed a little strange, but then again, my family was allowed to live here as a contingency of my job. None of the rules seemed like anything to worry about in comparison to the HOA Ashley and I had put up with for years, and I could see a reason for just about every rule listed. The job was to maintain the lighthouse and keep the lamp lit during the night, so that part made perfect sense. All the nonsense about keeping the light off or on if a day fell on a certain day of the month seemed a bit odd, but I figured it must have something to do with electricity costs or something. Some corporate loopholes based on peak and off-peak usage times or something. After all, a giant light like the one in the lighthouse used must be a killer when it comes to energy costs. Rule 2 would mean no family dinners out, but that was alright. Ashley had wanted to get away from the world, and we fairly rarely ate out anyways. Besides, I was being paid handsomely to care for and maintain the property, so it was reasonable that there should always be someone around in case an emergency were to happen. The deliveries rule made perfect sense as well. Couriers of all types were working people, and the lighthouse was treated as a working property. If they never crossed the property line, the Stalward could never be sued for a workplace injury if someone were to slip and fall. The same held true about guests, especially during specific hours of operation. The only bit that was any sort of strange from my perspective was the mailboxes. Maybe they were having a bit of a fight with the local post office or something. Who knew? It didn't matter much to me, since we had no real bills to pay outside of groceries and other supplies. The only mail I could really expect would be junk mail. The hallway opened out into a large circular kitchen that seemed to make up the entire ground floor. Cabinets and counters wrapped around the far wall containing the sink, a stove, a large two-door refrigerator, and a large table nook, complete with bench seating, was built into the wall where it protruded slightly out from one side. A row of wide, thin windows wrapped around nearly the whole room, giving a breathtaking view of the grounds in all directions, save the direction of the front door, with its little hallway. I wished I had been able to see Ashley's face when she saw that. I knew she would have bounced with delight when her eyes registered it. For me, though, it meant that I would have to pack up our dining room table and chairs into the storage shed at the edge of the property, a task which did not sound particularly pleasant, given that there was no driveway headed to the shed. Lugging furniture across acres of grass. Great. To the left of the room was the beginning of a spiral staircase that I could only assume would continue throughout the tower to the light box at the top. I grabbed onto the metal railing that wound its way up the right side of the stairs, the cool metal against my palm, and made my way up the stairs. They were solid wood, and apparently quite well maintained for their age. In fact, only one stair, about halfway between the first floor and the second, gave a little squeak as I made my way up. The second floor was wide open, with a little faux mantel built into the wall, complete with an electric fireplace, with another wide window that opened out towards the left-hand side of the property. Looking out in the distance, I could see the little storage shed that I would soon be filling with our unneeded table. And chairs. And who knew what else. At least, the stairway wasn't incredibly narrow, but dragging the sofa and everything else up to the second floor was not going to be fun. We assumed that this would be the living room, and I ran a hand through my shaggy black hair. Definitely not going to be fun. I heard bickering coming from upstairs, Max and Briar arguing, no doubt, over bedrooms, and shook my head as I made my way to the third floor to find the pair of them arguing with each other, poor Ashley standing between them, looking exasperated as well. Hey, what's all this now? I said as I drew upon the landing of the third floor, finding it to be another wide open space like the floor below, its window opening up with a stunning view of the small cliff the lighthouse sat upon and looking out over the sea. I walked over to Ashley as she smiled at me. They're fighting over the bedroom at the top of the stairs, Ashley said with a small shake of her head and threw her hands up in a gently joking manner. Well, that's an easy one, we said, looking down on the kids who were still, thankfully, shorter than I was. The bedroom is mine and Mom's. I've gotta be close to the lantern room at the top for work.
Fine, then I get the next highest,
Max said, turning to run up the stairs before Briar could react, going to claim the room by right of first occupation. I chuckled and reached down to ruffle Briar's hair when he looked at me, his jaw hanging open as if he couldn't believe it. Sorry, kid. Sounds like Max got there first, I said with a small laugh, and Ashley started to laugh too, before pointing out that it meant Max would have to climb way more stairs to bring things up to the room, and more stairs to climb every day to take a shower and go to bed. Suddenly, Briar's spirits were lifted, and Briar was absolutely convinced that they had gotten the better end of the deal before walking up the stairs, leaving me alone with my wife. Well, what do you think? I asked, thoughts of the letter temporarily forgotten. She smiled at me before doing a little spin, her arms out to twirl with the hem of her knee-length dress, her simple shoes clicking gently on the polished wood floor, the light from the window dancing up her hair. She was stunningly beautiful like that. Not some photo brush model from a magazine, but a real down-to-earth woman, the mother of my children, happy and excited about her new home and the new life that was to come with it. It's perfect, Eli, she said, gushing with excitement. Well, for now at least. I still want to move to Alaska, you know. And then she was off to the races, chattering away happily at me while leading me back downstairs to the kitchen and pointing out which each cabinet was going to be for, and the little pantry door that stood to the side of the entryway that I hadn't even noticed. It seemed to share the little outcrop from the tower. That would explain why the hallway had been deceptively narrow compared to how it looked from outside. She led me back upstairs, excitedly telling me about how she planned to do up the living room once we got all the furniture moved in, and what colour she wanted to paint the walls, how she was going to love having the cosy little fireplace when the winters came. Through the tower we went, level by level, my excited wife showing me around her new home and sharing her vision for the space, and me following along like the love-struck idiot that I always became when she was happy. Her happiness was all that we had ever really wanted in life. The third floor with its window that opened up out towards the sea was going to be a computer room, she said, for the kids to do their schoolwork. It was important to have a space that was still associated with just learning and applying themselves, she had insisted. The fourth floor landing was closed off by a wall and a door which stood open. This was Pryor's new room, the right side of the level having been sanctioned off to include a full bathroom, toilet, shower, sink, the whole shebang. The kids had no idea how jealous I would have been at that age to have my own bathroom. Like the floor below it, the fifth floor was again closed off by a wall with a door. I reached out for the handle to open it, and was, of course, admonished by my wife. Apparently, I'm supposed to knock on Max's bedroom door if it's closed, even if the kid wasn't moved in yet. I rolled my eyes and knocked, fixing Ashley with a decidedly sarcastic and intentionally dopey smile. After being given permission to enter, and I shot my wife another eye roll, I opened the door to find Max relaxing on a window seat that was built into the wall under the large window that overlooked the property, facing out the way we had come in, down the driveway and off into the trees that lined the road just beyond. Max looked comfortable as Ashley and I looked around. Max, too, had a private bedroom, this floor being apparently identical to the one below it. These kids had no idea how lucky they had it. The sixth floor opened directly into another circular room with a wide window that looked out to the left of the property, where I could see the top of the storage shed mocking me and many, many trips that I would soon be making to it. We had no idea what this room was going to be used for, but Ashley did. Her art studio. Ashley was a painter and had long dreamed about having a space that was her own, that she could fill with paints and supplies and canvases and easels. How could I say no when she was so excited? I would order some things in for her to set it up just how she wanted. Heck, we could afford to do it now. She threw her arms around my neck again and kissed me when I said as much, then grabbed my hand to drag me upstairs to our new bedroom. Like the children's rooms below, the landing was walled off with a door that opened up into the wide, open room, which was divided on one side into a bathroom that featured a large clawfoot tub and shower, a toilet, and dual sinks. By the window, the window was breathtaking. Nearly an entire bend of the wall that faced the sea, from just a few inches above the floor to just a few inches under the ceiling, was a giant bay window partitioned in the middle. I could see for miles out of the window, over the cliffs and rock places where the waves crashed into the white sprays against the shore, and out into the endless ocean beyond. I already knew Ashley was going to love watching the sun to set from here. For my part, I was not looking forward to dragging the queen-size bed all the way up here, let alone the dressers, and the television, and the nightstand, and the headboard. My back ached already, just thinking about it. But once it was done, it would be done. No time to lose. I clapped my hands together, ready to get started, and realised that I was still holding the letter from Mrs. Geraldine. Right, I said to Ashley as she looked over, taking notice for the first time that I had something in my hand, and she walked a few steps closer. Mrs. Geraldine left a letter and some paperwork we all need to sign. Rules for the house, I said as I handed over both sheets to her. I'll go see if I've got a pen in the truck somewhere. Will you let the kids know the rules? I asked her as I turned back towards the stairs. She nodded and started reading as I headed on down the stairs, hoping that she would meet me in the kitchen on the ground floor instead of making me walk all the way back upstairs again. Playing up and down was going to be murder for a while, but I knew we'd all get used to it. I chuckled to myself at the thought of getting one of those automatic chairlifters involved, the ones that I use for the elderly. I knew it was implausible, since I moved with a sense of cold molasses, but it was pretty funny nonetheless. I made my way out of the truck and dug around in the centre console for a pen for a few minutes before I found one, shaking my head to myself about how much it was going to suck to bring everything into the house and up all those stairs, let alone to the storage shed, way off in the distance. I closed the truck door and started turning back to head in when something caught my eye. Well, someone. A pair of someones, as it turned out. A pair of men stood in grey uniforms just outside the gate that Ashley and I had left open when we drove up. We turned towards them. The taller one lifted his hand up in the air and gave a call out. I waved back to show that I had seen them, shouted a quick "Hello!" and started making my way down the driveway towards them. As I approached, I saw they each wore the same grey uniform and grey pants, wore black work boots and a bowl cap. The taller one sported a buzz cut and beard, and the name Fritz was emblazoned on the front of his shirt, just above his left front pocket. The shorter one had very light, blonde hair that stuck out away from his scalp, the colour and texture of old straw. His shirt read John. Fritz introduced them both and presented me with a pink work slip that read, "Package on the Rock, Moving Company Inc." in big letters at the top. Mrs. Geraldine had paid a company to meet us at the Stalward when we arrived and move all her stuff out of the moving truck and into the house and storage shed. They had us scheduled for tomorrow, which was the date we were supposed to arrive, but one of the locals had seen the U-Haul coming up this way, and they took it to mean that we had arrived early, so they came by to check it out. Bless you, Mrs. Geraldine. We apologised to the guys that we had arrived ahead of schedule, and was immediately assured that it wasn't a problem and they could have us all moved in today, since they weren't exactly booked to the gills with appointments lately. We shared a laugh over the quaintness of a small town, and I led them up to the driveway with me, asking them if they would need any help moving stuff inside. Just the doors to the vehicles unlocked, and someone to point out where we wanted everything, was all they needed, or wanted apparently. Double bless you, Mrs. Geraldine, I invited the movers inside to meet the wife, who was, placidly, on the ground floor in the kitchen with the kids. She looked surprised to see me accompanied by the movers, but I quickly explained that Mrs. Geraldine had set it all up and that these fine gentlemen were going to move our stuff in for us. Ashley positively beamed and immediately began fussing around, lamenting that we didn't have anything to offer the guests outside of a few lukewarm sodas in the car. She was always so hospitable. My dear wife. Fritz and Mark politely declined and made their way out to the U-Haul to begin the work of unpacking, while I passed the pen to Ashley for her and the kids to sign up on the page, telling her that I was going to head out with the guys and get the truck open for them, make sure that there was nothing I could do to help out. Alright, listen, I'm a guy. As nice as it was to not have to carry all our stuff up the countless flight of stairs, I still felt a bit uneasy and entitled if I wasn't going to at least offer to help, even if I was just going to be making a nuisance of myself. I made my way down to the drive to the guys and opened the U-Haul, trying to help out until they let me know they didn't expect any help at all, and that my wife could point them in the direction of where to put things. That Mrs. Geraldine had booked them so that I would have plenty of time to familiarise myself with the house and the lantern room to get the light running for the first night that would be at the Stalward. Feeling a bit out of place, but taking the hint, I left them to it and made my way back to Ashley. The kids were running out the front door to go play in the yard as I made my way through the hallway and joined Ashley in the kitchen. I let her know that the movers just needed her to tell them where she wanted everything, and she smiled with a look that said, "Can you believe how lucky we are?" before handing me the pen and the sheet that she and the kids had signed. Clearly, she didn't think anything more about it than I did, and gave me another peck on the cheek as she made her way out to direct the movers. I leaned down over the table look and scribbled my name and signature with a date onto the page, then folded it back up and followed her out. Might as well drop it off in the blue hide-kind box sooner rather than later. With no postage or even an envelope, I couldn't imagine that the post office would just come and collect it. But given the way that Mrs. Geraldine had arranged the movers, maybe she had some sort of agreement with a private service or something. The mailboxes were, in fact, 2 little metal boxes on metal posts just to the right-hand side of the driveway. The one closest to the office had been painted with the same red paint as the lighthouse, while the other was similarly painted in blue. Each had a little metal handle on the front, along with a clasp, like in a public bathroom stall, that held it closed, but no lock. I opened the blue box and carefully laid the paper inside before closing the door up again and making my way back to the driveway. Ashley was standing near the truck, watching the movers raise a 2-person carry to take one half of the sectional and start making their way into the house. I slipped my arms around her waist from behind and hugged her. "Hey, beautiful. I'm headed up to the top floor to start checking out what I need to know for the light box, since I've got to get it up and running for tonight." I kissed her neck and she giggled, swatting my hand gently where it rested on her stomach. I asked her to let me know when the guys were done, if I wasn't back down by the time they were, so that we could return the U-Haul a day early. Maybe we could find a pizza plate or something on the way back to bring home from dinner, since we'd need to order groceries that night. She happily agreed, and I made my way up the stairs to the lantern room, standing out of the way for Friss and John as they made their way downstairs, before heading up myself. Holy Lightbox Batman. The lantern room was a vast open space at the top of the tower, with black steel walls that were interspaced with enormous windows that stretched from waist height to the ceiling, giving a perfect 360-degree view of the world around me. A workbench stretched around the entire floor at waist height, with various knobs and switches and cages strewn out seemingly at random here and there. And of course, rising up in the very centre of the room was the light itself. A massive double-sided mechanism for two huge lenses, one on each side, held together in the middle by metal atop a steel pole as thick as myself 3 times over. I stood there, just staring at it for a few moments, honestly blown away by how large it actually was, compared to how big I thought it was going to be. Then we looked around for the black pointer Mrs. Geraldine had mentioned. Sure enough, it was lying down on a bench just near the top of the stairs. I flipped it open, and the first page read: The Stalward Lighthouse Lantern Room Operations and Procedures. Hi boy. This was going to take some time to read through. Darn thing must have had over 500 pages. But at least they were all organised with those little numbered tags that break it into sections. I wished I had a chair up here already, but concentrated myself on sitting on the workbench for now, and started making my way through the basic operations, and hoped that I would figure it out enough to get it up and running in time tonight. As it turned out, the basic operations of the light were simple enough, having been upgraded to an electronic system years ago. In fact, it was little more than turning on a few switches and knobs, setting the rotation speed, and then just making sure that the light didn't go out during the night because of a malfunction or storm or something. There was even an alarm that would go off if the light did go out, that I wouldn't have to sit up all night waiting on the light. In the event that the electronic light did go out for whatever reason, I would need to switch over either to the backup generator for power, or, in extreme cases, where the generator was inoperational, through a series of levers and switches, as well as open the hatches that were every few feet under the workbench, and light the separate high-powered lanterns that ran on kerosene to get through the night. Any repairs that would be needed would be performed by a vendor whose name, address and phone number were listed in the book under section 5 for maintenance and emergency repairs. According to the manual, in fact, the bulb was to be replaced every 4 months, and the repair service was already on a service contract to come out and do just that every 4 months. In reality, the bulk of the job was going to be manning the radio that was set out on the workbench, and interacting with passing ships to warn them of their approach as needed. Nowadays, the manual said, with GPS and tracking systems, it required very little operation at all. Still though, a large chunk of the manual was devoted to nautical terms and procedures. It would take some time to learn these, I was sure, but that wasn't too much to handle. It was looking more and more like this was the easiest and cushiest job of my life when I came across a page that had been inserted into the binder. Unlike the rest of the pages, which were the thick paper of a printing house, this was a single sheet of loose leaf paper that had been hastily scribbled in pen. As I looked at it, it appeared that this page must have been written not just by one person, but rather by three. At least, that's as best as I could make out, based on the different handwriting that appeared. Whoever they were, they had struck this additional handwritten sheet into the back of section 9, radio etiquette. I literally found myself scratching at my head as I read through the page. It read, "Rules to survive the lantern room. Never answer a radio call SOS from the Morrowind. Never turn radio on between 1 AM and 1:30 AM. Lock every hatch clockwise before turning on the light. If you find yourself not alone, try not to breathe. You can't run. You can only hide and wait for morning." I shook my head and laughed. This stupid list must have been some kind of running joke, passed from one caretaker to the next, designed to freak out the new guy. Who was I to end our tradition? I took up the pen that I had signed the paperwork with earlier out of my pocket and thought for a minute. What would be a good rule to add to the list that was sure to scare the pants of some poor unsuspecting schmuck when I left? Before I could think of a suitably spooky answer, Ashley appeared at the top of the stairs to let me know that the movers had finished. I hadn't noticed how much time had passed until she called out for me, but it was well into the afternoon at this point. I shook my head a few times to clear it and set the binder down before hopping off the workbench. Had to go return the U-Haul before they closed, and we got charged an extra day for nothing. Ashley was beaming, if not a little sweaty, from unpacking boxes, when I hissed her cheek and suggested that we get a move on, get the kids piled into the trucks so that we could drop off the U-Haul and serve her some pizza. She had punished me right away. "Did you even read the paper we all signed? One of us always has to be here from now on." I scoffed. We had only just signed the paper this morning. No way could anyone have picked it up yet. Therefore, it could not possibly be in effect yet. One trip into town and a pizza wasn't going to ruin everything and bring the lighthouse crumbling into the sea. Eventually, she relented, and we locked up the lighthouse before heading out, both kids in the family truck with Ashley, while I drove the U-Haul. I paused and got out after backing out of the driveway to close the lock on the front gate, and then we were off to return the rented moving truck. It was a goodly drive away from the coast back into town, and it took nearly 20 minutes of driving through the densely packed trees down into the valley where the town lay before we even saw our first house. Nearly 40 minutes before we reached the U-Haul Renter Centre and dropped off the truck. It would be, that meant, round about an hour before we would get back home, and I figured that we would make it well before sundown. We did manage to find a little pizza shop that was open, and we stopped to get a table. I ask you, who puts pineapple and pepperoni on pizza together at the same time? My kids, that's who. Couple of heathens, I swear. Debate all you want about pineapple on pizza. Pineapple and pepperoni is not a good combination, pizza or otherwise. Ashley and I split a chicken, spinach and feta pizza with some crushed red pepper flake, like normal people, before we made our way back to the lighthouse. As I stopped to get out and open the gate for our entrance, I noticed that the door to the blue mailbox was hanging open, swaying in the breeze. Whoever had come to collect the paperwork hadn't closed it properly. I kicked myself mentally for a minute and went to close it up. I hoped that whoever had picked up the paperwork would assume that someone was still inside. Ashley and I looked at each other with a guilty nervousness as I climbed back into the truck, and her eyes clearly said, "I told you so," in that way they did every so often when she was inescapably right about something. I drove the truck in and up the driveway, then went back to shut the gate to avoid having to face this conversation for a few more minutes as Ashley and the kids made their way up to the house. Ashley was waiting for me in the kitchen, her lips pursed and one hand on her hip when I walked in, the kids having already made their way upstairs to continue packing their rooms. I know, we said before she spoke. You were right. I hoped it would in there. She nodded with self-satisfaction, then kissed my cheek so I would know all was forgiven. I would obviously never do that again. I told her as much. Ashley was going to keep unpacking, she said, while I worked out how to get the light and radio up and running for the night. We parted ways in the kitchen, and I began the climb all the way up the tower to the light box. The rule made sense, of course, but honestly, it was pretty stupid in all actuality. The Stalward was an hour's drive outside the nearest town, set back at least an acre from the road. I was going to break into an old lighthouse anyway, I scoffed. My question was immediately answered as soon as I reached the top of the lantern room. For there, standing in the lantern light, was a figure.